Hello and welcome back to the Cosmic Enigma. Here we share real-life experiences of encounters with the unknown stories that come from beyond the stars, crafted to help you relax and drift off to sleep. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. I love seeing just how far this mystery reaches. Now find a comfortable spot, take a deep breath, and let yourself be carried away. Story 1. The air felt dense and alive, pressing gently against my skin as if inquiring of my presence. A subtle vibration hummed through my bones, unsettling like the faint trembling of an engine's idle, yet no sound accompanied it. The light here was soft, dispersed without direction, leaving no shadows and erasing the concept of time. I reached out, but my hand moved slowly, as though through syrup, meeting surfaces that shifted and rippled away. A sensation thrummed within me, not entirely my own, like a borrowed heartbeat. I sensed a presence, felt the air tighten, aware of a silent audience lurking just beyond perception. I woke with that familiar weight in my chest, the kind that lingers after you've forgotten something important. The dream had been simple enough. I was lying in my bed, but the ceiling light was on, just that. A soft, steady glow where darkness should have been. Nothing more, nothing threatening, just wrong enough to pull me from sleep. I dismissed it as stress. Work had been demanding lately, and my sleep schedule was erratic. Dreams like this happen when your mind can't properly shut down. The brain processes the day's anxieties through strange, insignificant details. A light that shouldn't be on, that's all it was. But the dream returned. This time I remained in that luminous bedroom longer. The light wasn't harsh, but it pulsed gently like something breathing. I could hear a sound now, distant and metallic, like voices filtered through water. The words were unclear, but the cadence was deliberate, as if someone was speaking directly to me from another room. I tried to move toward the sound, but my body felt heavy, anchored to the bed by invisible weights. The light grew brighter, shifting from white to something warmer, more golden. I felt myself being watched, though I saw no one. The metallic voices grew slightly clearer, but still incomprehensible, like a radio station just out of range. There was an urgency to them now, as if they were trying to tell me something important. I woke again, this time with a strange taste in my mouth. Metallic, clean, like I'd been holding a coin on my tongue. During the following days, I began noticing things, small things. My bedroom light had a new bulb, though I didn't remember changing it. The old one sat in my trash can, unbroken, still warm to the touch. My sheets smelled different too, like ozone after a storm, but cleaner, more artificial. There was a mark on my wrist, a small circle of slightly reddened skin, perfectly round. It didn't hurt, and I couldn't recall how it got there. When I pressed it, I felt a faint tingling, as if something was responding from beneath the surface. The radio in my kitchen had developed a habit of crackling with static between stations, picking up fragments of voices that sounded almost familiar. I would catch myself pausing while making coffee, listening for words that never quite formed. The third dream felt more real than my waking hours. I was in the same bedroom, but now the space seemed larger, the walls farther away. The pulsing light had become an oval shape, hovering just above me, breathing with that same gentle rhythm. The metallic voices were clearer now, though still indistinct, like conversations heard through thick glass. Time moved strangely here. I would focus on the light for what felt like hours, then suddenly find myself in a different position, as if moments had been edited out of my experience. The air was thick with that ozone scent, and I could feel something moving around me, just beyond my peripheral vision. I tried to speak, to call out, but no sound emerged. Instead, I felt as if I were being lifted, though no part of my body moved. The sensation was gentle, almost caring, like being cradled by invisible hands. The oval light pulsed brighter, and I heard something that might have been my own voice, but distorted, speaking words I didn't remember saying. When I woke, I was lying diagonally across my bed, my feet hanging off the edge. The taste of metal was stronger now, and my wrist bore two more circular marks, arranged in a perfect triangle with the first. The dreams began blighting into my waking life. I would be sitting at my desk working when I'd hear that distant metallic humming. My computer screen would flicker, displaying interference patterns that reminded me of the pulsing light. Colleagues would ask if I was feeling all right, mentioning that I seemed distracted, that I'd been staring at nothing for long periods. I started losing track of time. I would begin a task and suddenly find myself somewhere else with no memory of moving. Once I discovered myself standing in my backyard in the middle of the night, barefoot in the dew-covered grass, looking up at a sky that seemed too bright, too active, with moving lights that others insisted were just airplanes. The circular marks on my wrist had multiplied, forming a precise pattern that extended up my arm. They didn't hurt, but they responded to touch with that same subtle tingling, as if something was awakening beneath my skin. My reflection began to look unfamiliar, not dramatically changed, but subtly wrong, like a photograph that's been slightly overexposed. My eyes seemed brighter, more reflective, and sometimes I caught myself making expressions I didn't remember forming. The dreams were no longer confined to sleep. I would slip into that luminous bedroom while fully awake, the transition so seamless I couldn't pinpoint when it happened. The oval light had become a constant companion, pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat, or perhaps my heartbeat had synchronized with its rhythm. The metallic voices were clearer now, speaking in a language that felt familiar but remained incomprehensible. They seemed pleased when I appeared, welcoming, as if I was returning home after a long absence. I began to understand that these weren't dreams at all, but memories surfacing from somewhere deep and carefully hidden. The bedroom itself was changing, becoming more detailed with each visit. I could see instruments now, sleek and unfamiliar, arranged around the space with purposeful precision. The walls hummed with that same gentle vibration I felt in my bones, and the air itself seemed alive with invisible activity. I started to remember fragments, being lifted, examined, spoken to in that metallic language that my mind somehow translated into concepts rather than words. There was care in these interactions, a scientific curiosity mixed with something that might have been affection. I was important to them, valuable, chosen for reasons I was only beginning to understand. My waking life became the dream, pale and insubstantial compared to those luminous experiences. I moved through my daily routine like an actor playing a role, waiting for the moment when I could return to that place of light and purpose. The circular marks had spread across my entire body now, forming intricate patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. They glowed faintly in darkness, pulsing in unison with that familiar rhythm. When I pressed my palm against them, I could feel my consciousness expanding, touching the edges of vast networks of thought and communication. I began to understand that I had always been part of this, that the dreams were simply the process of remembering what had been carefully obscured. The metallic voices belonged to beings who had been watching, studying, preparing. The oval light was a doorway, a bridge between states of existence that I was learning to navigate. My reflection had become something beautiful and strange, my eyes now clearly luminous, my skin bearing the intricate patterns of connection that marked me as chosen. I no longer needed to sleep to visit that luminous space. It was always there, overlaying my ordinary reality like a second sight. The beings spoke to me directly now, their metallic voices translating into pure understanding. They had been patient, allowing my mind to gradually accept what it had always known. The dreams were ending because I no longer needed them. I was ready for the next phase. I lay in my bed, feeling the familiar weight of that dense, living air pressing against my skin. The oval light pulsed above me, breathing with its gentle rhythm. The metallic voices welcomed me back, and I felt myself being lifted, cradled by invisible hands that had always been there. But something was different this time. On my nightstand next to my bed sat a glass of water I had never poured. It was still cold, condensation beating on its surface, as if someone had just placed it there moments before I arrived. The water was real, tangible, impossible. And in its surface I could see the reflection of the oval light, pulsing steadily, breathing with that same rhythm I had learned to love, casting its glow across a world that was no longer just a dream. Story 2. I had just closed the leather-bound book, feeling the worn cover surrender under my fingertips. The musty aroma of old paper lingered, wrapping around my senses like a forgotten cloak. My skin brushed against the smooth surface of the desk, and a seeping chill crept through my knuckles. Instinctively, I glanced at the stack of abandoned letters, their edges yellowed and curling inward. A subtle weight pressed on my chest, urging me to leave. Yet something in the air shifted. It was the silence between the pages that unsettled me. The humming started again tonight. It's been 3 weeks now since I returned, and the sound follows me everywhere. Low, constant, like electricity running through the walls of my apartment. My neighbors don't hear it. I've asked. They look at me with that careful expression people reserve for those who might be losing their grip on reality. The television turns itself on at the same time every night. Channel static, white noise that fills the room with dancing shadows. I've unplugged it twice, but somehow the screen still glows with that pale, cold light. The repair technician found nothing wrong, said the wiring was perfect, better than perfect actually. His words, not mine. Sleep doesn't come easily anymore. When I close my eyes, I see that vast expanse of water stretching endlessly in every direction. The boat rocking gently beneath me, the sound of waves lapping against the hull. But it's not a peaceful memory. There's something underneath it, something that makes my skin crawl even now as I lie in my bed, sheets damp with perspiration. My hands shake when I try to write about it. The pen feels heavy, foreign, like my fingers have forgotten how to hold it properly. Sometimes I find pages covered in my handwriting that I don't remember creating, descriptions of lights moving beneath the surface, of sounds that water shouldn't make. The Coast Guard found me drifting 3 miles from where I'd anchored, engine dead, radio silent. They said I'd been missing for 18 hours, but I only remember being out there for an afternoon. The gap in time sits in my mind like a missing tooth, my tongue constantly probing the empty space where memory should be. I keep thinking about that moment when everything changed. The water around my small fishing boat had been calm, almost unnaturally so. The surface reflected the sky like polished glass, and I remember thinking how perfect it was, how peaceful. Then something moved down there, far below, casting shadows that didn't match anything I could see above the surface. The fish had stopped biting hours before. My line hung straight down into the dark water, motionless. No current, no nibbles, nothing. It should have felt wrong then, but I was mesmerized by the stillness. The ocean had become something else entirely, transformed into a mirror world that seemed to breathe with its own rhythm. That's when I saw it, not clearly, never clearly. a shape moving beneath the boat, massive and silent. The water didn't ripple or disturb, but I could feel its presence like a weight pressing up from the depths. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I couldn't look away, couldn't move. The fishing rod slipped from my numb fingers and clattered against the bottom of the boat. The sound seemed to break some kind of spell. The shape paused in its movement, and I had the terrible sensation that it was aware of me, looking up through fathoms of dark water, studying me the way I might study an insect trapped under glass. The boat began to rock then, gentle movements that felt deliberate, purposeful. I reached for the radio with hands that didn't feel like my own. The static that poured from the speaker wasn't normal interference. It had patterns, rhythms that almost sounded like communication, like something trying to speak through the electronic noise. My voice cracked when I tried to call for help, the words coming out as whispers that the radio couldn't pick up. The engine wouldn't start. I pulled the cord again and again until my arm ached, but it only coughed and died. The smell of gasoline mixed with something else, something metallic and sharp that made my eyes water. The air itself felt thick, harder to breathe, as if the atmosphere had changed composition. Then the humming started, the same sound that haunts me now, but louder, more insistent. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the water, from the sky, from inside my own skull. The boat's metal fittings began to vibrate in harmony with the sound, creating a symphony of resonance that made my teeth ache. Going back further, I remember the morning I decided to take the boat out. The weather had been perfect for weeks, but something felt different about that particular day. The harbor was unusually quiet, most of the other boats still moored despite the ideal conditions. The harbor master had given me an odd look when I'd signed out, as if he wanted to say something but thought better of it. The water had been strange colors that morning, deeper blues and greens that seemed to shift and swirl without any wind to disturb them. Other fishermen had mentioned it in passing, joking about algae blooms or unusual currents, but standing on the dock, watching the patterns move beneath the surface, it didn't feel like anything natural. My tackle box had felt heavier than usual as I loaded it into the boat. The metal lures inside rattled with each step, creating tiny chimes that seemed too loud in the morning stillness. Even the seagulls were quiet, perched on the pier posts like silent sentinels watching my preparations. The engine had started perfectly then, purring with the smooth confidence of a well-maintained motor. I remember feeling grateful for the sound, the normalcy of mechanical noise cutting through the unnatural quiet of the harbor. The boat responded to my touch like an extension of my own body, cutting through the calm water with barely a wake. But even as I headed out toward my usual fishing spot, something felt off about the horizon. The line where water met sky seemed blurred, indistinct, as if the world was slightly out of focus in that direction. I attributed it to morning haze, the kind of atmospheric distortion that happens when warm air meets cool water. The further I went from shore, the more pronounced the effect became. The water around the boat took on an oily quality, reflecting light in ways that hurt to look at directly. My compass began to spin lazily, unable to find magnetic north, the needle drifting in slow circles that made no sense. I should have turned back then. Every instinct I possessed was screaming warnings, but something else was pulling me forward. A curiosity that felt foreign, as if it wasn't entirely my own thought driving me deeper into the strange waters. The shoreline faded to a thin line behind me, then disappeared entirely into the atmospheric distortion. That's when I dropped anchor and began to fish, settling into what I thought would be a peaceful afternoon on the water. The sun was warm on my shoulders, the boat rocked gently in the non-existent swells, and for a moment everything seemed perfect, normal, safe. I cast my line into water so clear I could see it descending into the blue-black depths, growing smaller and smaller until it vanished into darkness. The silence was complete then, broken only by the gentle lap of water against the hull and my own steady breathing. It was the most beautiful morning I had ever experienced on the ocean, and I remember thinking that nothing could possibly disturb such perfect tranquility. The thought feels like a cruel joke now, knowing what was already stirring in the depths below, watching and waiting for the right moment to rise. Story 3. I'm trying to remember what happened. The hallway, yes, it wasn't unusual for the hallway to be quiet at that hour. The carpet seemed more worn in certain spots, places where footsteps lingered despite the absence of anyone passing through. I noticed a picture frame was slightly crooked, but I left it as it was. The calendar on the wall showed yesterday's date, something I hadn't changed yet. The windows were closed, yet a faint breeze hinted at something amiss. I didn't hear anything beyond the usual creaks that the house made. As I left, I made sure the door was almost shut. But that's where it starts to break apart. I have these flashes, dreams maybe, sensations that feel more real than the chair I'm sitting in now. Sometimes I wake up and my hands are shaking, and there's this taste in my mouth like I've been sucking on copper pennies. The taste stays for hours. The sound of my own breathing, that's what I remember most clearly. Not the rhythm you'd expect, but something labored like I'd been running, but I wasn't running. I was standing perfectly still in that hallway, wasn't I? The carpet beneath my feet felt different than usual, softer, warmer, like it had absorbed something. There was a hum. I keep coming back to that hum. It wasn't coming from the refrigerator or the air conditioning unit. This was something else, something that seemed to pulse inside my skull. When I try to focus on it, it slips away like water through my fingers. But when I'm not thinking about it, when I'm washing dishes or folding laundry, it comes back. A low, steady vibration that makes my teeth ache. The picture frame, I said it was crooked, didn't I? But that's not right. It was facing the wrong direction entirely. The glass was reflecting something that shouldn't have been there. I can almost see it now if I close my eyes and press hard enough against my eyelids until the colors bloom. A shape that moved when everything else was still. My skin remembers things my mind won't let me keep. There's a spot on my left shoulder that burns sometimes, like someone pressed their palm there and left it too long. The sensation comes without warning, usually when I'm trying to sleep. I'll reach back to touch it, but there's nothing there, just skin that feels too warm, too sensitive. The breeze, I mentioned the breeze, but the windows were closed. I checked them twice, maybe 3 times, my hands on the latches, testing, making sure. But the air moved anyway, carrying something with it. A smell I can't quite place, metallic but not quite. Organic, but not quite, like the air after lightning strikes, but heavier, thicker. I find myself checking the locks more often now, not just the front door, but all of them, the back door, the windows, even the cabinets. My fingers trace the mechanisms over and over, testing their strength. Sometimes I catch myself doing it and I don't remember starting. My hands just know what to do. There are gaps, whole chunks of time that feel scooped out, leaving rough edges that don't fit together properly. I'll be standing in the kitchen and suddenly I'm in the bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes look different in those moments, wider, like I'm seeing something behind myself that isn't there when I turn around. The calendar showed yesterday's date, but which yesterday? I've changed it now, moved it forward, but the numbers don't feel right. Time has become unreliable, stretching and contracting like elastic. Minutes feel like hours, hours disappear entirely. I started writing things down, but my handwriting looks strange on the page, shaky, urgent, like someone else was guiding my hand. The footsteps in the worn spots of the carpet, I keep thinking about those. They weren't my footsteps, were they? The pattern was wrong, too close together, or maybe too far apart. I tried walking the same path, matching my stride to the worn areas, but it felt unnatural, like I was forcing my body into someone else's rhythm. There's a door at the end of the hallway that I haven't opened. I don't remember deciding not to open it, but my hand stops every time I reach for the handle. The wood around the frame looks different now, darker. The paint is peeling in places I swear were perfect before. Sometimes I hear things on the other side, not voices exactly, more like the sound of fabric rustling or pages turning. The light beneath that door changes. During the day it's steady, predictable, but at night it flickers. Not like a bulb going bad, but like something is moving back and forth, blocking and unblocking the source. I've counted the rhythm. 7 seconds of light, 3 seconds of shadow. 7 seconds, 3 seconds, over and over until I fall asleep. My dreams are full of hallways now, long corridors that stretch further than they should, lined with doors that won't open and windows that show the wrong view. I walk through them with purpose, like I'm looking for something specific, but I never find it. I always wake up before I reach the end. The house creaks differently now. The sounds come from places that shouldn't make noise. The walls, the ceiling, even the floor in spots where nothing has changed. It's like the building is settling into a new shape, adjusting to accommodate something that wasn't there before. I find myself listening for patterns, waiting for the next sound, trying to predict where it will come from. My hands remember textures my mind has forgotten. Sometimes I catch myself rubbing my fingertips together as if trying to recall the feeling of something specific. Rough but not sandpaper rough, cold but not metal cold, alive but not quite warm. The sensation is so vivid I can almost grasp it, but it always slips away. There are marks on the walls now, small scratches near the baseboards as if something had been dragged along the floor. I don't remember them being there before, but I can't be sure. My memory has become unreliable, full of holes and inconsistencies. I measure the scratches with my fingers, trying to determine what could have made them. They're too regular to be accidental, too purposeful to be random. The taste of copper is stronger today. It coats my tongue no matter how much water I drink or how many times I brush my teeth. Sometimes it's accompanied by a smell that seems to come from inside my own nose. Sweet but wrong, like fruit that's been left too long in the sun. I keep finding myself drawn back to that hallway. Not consciously, but I'll realize I'm standing there, looking at the same worn spots in the carpet, the same crooked picture frame that I straightened but somehow moved again. My body knows something my mind won't accept. My feet follow a path I don't remember learning. The hum is getting stronger. It doesn't come and go anymore, but sits constant in the background of everything I do. When I focus on other sounds, trying to drown it out, it grows louder. When I try to ignore it, it seeps into my thoughts, coloring everything with its low, persistent vibration. I've started wondering if other people can hear it, but I'm afraid to ask. There are moments when everything becomes crystal clear, when the fragments align just enough for me to glimpse the shape of what happened. But those moments are brief, like looking at the sun, and they leave me more confused than before. I see flashes of motion, hear snippets of sound that might be voices or might be something else entirely. Then it's gone, leaving only the certainty that something important is just beyond my reach. The door at the end of the hallway is open now. I don't remember opening it, but there it is, revealing a room I've never seen before. Or maybe I have seen it, but from a different angle, in a different light. The walls are the wrong color, the windows face the wrong direction. Everything is familiar but displaced, like a photograph that's been cut up and reassembled incorrectly. My reflection in the bathroom mirror has been acting strangely. Not dramatically, nothing obvious enough to convince anyone else. but sometimes it moves a fraction of a second too late or too early. Sometimes it seems to be looking at something just over my shoulder, something I can't see no matter how quickly I turn around. I've started avoiding mirrors when possible. The sensation on my shoulder is spreading. What started as a warm spot has become a tingling that runs down my arm and up my neck. It's not unpleasant exactly, but it's wrong. Like my body is responding to a touch that isn't there, or remembering contact that never happened. I find myself rolling my shoulder, trying to dislodge whatever phantom presence has attached itself there. I've been having conversations I don't remember starting. I'll be in the middle of speaking, responding to questions I didn't hear, explaining things I don't understand. My voice sounds different during these episodes, more confident but less familiar. Like someone else is borrowing my vocal cords, using my mouth to say words I wouldn't choose. The worn spots in the carpet have changed shape. They're larger now, more defined. The pattern suggests movement that's both purposeful and repetitive, like someone pacing the same route over and over. I've tried to match my steps to the pattern, but it requires a stride that's uncomfortable, unnatural. Too long in some places, too short in others. Something is waking up. I can feel it stirring in the spaces between my thoughts, in the gaps where my memory should be. It's patient but persistent, like water finding cracks in stone. Each day it grows a little stronger, a little more coherent. Soon it will be strong enough to show me what I've been trying so hard not to remember. The hum has become a voice, though I can't make out the words. It speaks in frequencies just below understanding, in a language that bypasses my ears and goes straight to something deeper. My body responds to it even when my mind rebels. My hands move without permission. My feet follow paths I didn't choose to walk. I'm running out of ways to avoid the truth. The fragments are coming together despite my resistance, forming a picture I don't want to see. But it's too late now. Whatever happened in that hallway, whatever left those marks and wore those paths and opened that door, it's not finished with me yet. The memories are getting stronger. Story 4. I had been standing in the dim room, eyes trained on the narrow space beneath the closed door. The wood of the floorboard seemed to pulse softly, a barely perceptible shift that felt more alive than it should. The air hung heavy, unmoving, yet it carried a weight of anticipation that pressed against my skin. Each creak in the distance stretched the quiet, elongating every second into a drawn-out pause. My breath slowed, matching the room's silent rhythm, as if I could fill the space with sound if I dared inhale too sharply. I waited, though I couldn't say for what, until I noticed it, a hairline fracture running along the baseboard, one that hadn't been there before, or perhaps one I had not been meant to see. But none of that actually happened. I mean, not the way I just described it. I was probably just tired, standing there in my own house, looking at perfectly normal floorboards that had always been cracked. Old houses settle, everyone knows that. The wood shifts with the seasons, expands and contracts. There's nothing unusual about a hairline fracture in a baseboard. I see them everywhere now that I think about it. I didn't actually notice anything strange about the air either. It was just regular air, maybe a little stuffy because I hadn't opened the windows in a while. The room wasn't dim at all, actually. The overhead light was on, casting its usual yellowish glow across everything. I remember that light very clearly now, how it hummed just slightly, the way fluorescent bulbs do when they're getting old. The sound was perfectly normal, like a refrigerator running in the next room. I wasn't waiting for anything. That's ridiculous. I was just standing there, maybe checking to see if there was a draft under the door. That would explain the sensation I thought I felt, the way the air seemed to move without moving. Cold air sinks, warm air rises, basic physics. I must have been feeling the temperature difference between the two rooms. The door itself was completely ordinary. White painted wood, probably pine underneath, with a standard brass knob that had turned slightly green with age. I could see the brush marks in the paint if I looked closely enough, which I didn't because there was no reason to examine it that carefully. The gap underneath was maybe 3/4 of an inch, just enough space for air circulation. Standard construction. I don't know why I keep thinking about the silence, because there wasn't any unusual silence. Houses make noise constantly, pipes settling, the foundation adjusting, small animals moving around in the walls. That's all I was hearing. The occasional creak was just the house being a house. I've lived here long enough to recognize every sound this place makes. But I do remember how deliberate it felt, that silence, like it was listening back to me, which is completely irrational, of course. Silence can't listen. It's the absence of sound, not a presence. I was probably just hyperaware because I was tired. The way your hearing gets more sensitive when you're exhausted. Your brain starts interpreting normal background noise as something significant. The crack in the baseboard definitely wasn't new. I must have seen it hundreds of times before and just never paid attention. People don't usually stare at baseboards unless they're cleaning or looking for problems. It probably ran along the entire wall, the way settling cracks do. Wood expands, wood contracts, gaps appear. Completely normal. I wasn't really examining it closely anyway. I just happened to glance down and notice it, the way you might notice a loose thread on your sleeve. It was thin, barely visible, maybe a 1/16 of an inch wide at most. The kind of crack that appears gradually over months or even years. Nothing that would require immediate repair. Although now that I think about it, I can picture exactly how it looked. The way it started near the corner and ran toward the door, getting slightly wider as it went. The edges were clean, not ragged like you'd expect from settling damage. More like someone had drawn a line with a very sharp blade, but that's impossible, of course. Who would deliberately cut a baseboard, and why would they make such a precise, straight line? I definitely didn't touch it to see if it went all the way through the wood. That would be weird behavior, running your finger along a crack in someone's baseboard. Even if it was my own house, it would be strange to do that. I just looked at it for a second and then forgot about it. The way you forget about everything that's not important. But I can still feel how smooth the edges were under my fingertip. Not splintered at all, just clean wood that felt almost warm, like it had been recently cut. Which doesn't make sense because wood doesn't stay warm after you cut it, not unless you've been working on it for a while with power tools. And I hadn't been doing any construction work. I don't even own the right kind of saw to make a cut that precise. I wasn't really paying attention to the door itself either. It was closed, obviously, or I wouldn't have been looking at the gap underneath it. Just a regular interior door, the kind they put in every house built in the past 50 years. Hollow core, probably, lightweight and inexpensive. The kind that doesn't block sound very well, which is why I could hear what was happening on the other side. Except nothing was happening on the other side. The room beyond was empty, had been empty for weeks. I was just imagining sounds because that's what people do in quiet houses. Your brain fills in the silence with phantom noises, little clicks and whispers that aren't really there. It's a well-documented phenomenon. But I could hear them moving around in there very quietly, like they were trying not to disturb me. Soft footsteps on carpet, the kind you make when you're walking carefully in sock feet. Someone was definitely in there, even though I knew the room was empty. I could hear them shifting their weight, the small sounds a person makes when they're standing still but not perfectly still. I didn't open the door to check. Why would I? I knew there was nobody in there. It was probably just the house settling, or maybe sounds carrying from outside. Sound travels in unexpected ways through walls and floors. What I thought were footsteps could have been anything, a neighbor's TV, traffic on the street, even my own heartbeat echoing strangely in my ears. The brass doorknob felt cold when I touched it, colder than it should have been considering the house was heated. Metal conducts temperature efficiently, so it probably just felt cold in comparison to my warm hand. That's basic thermodynamics. There was nothing unusual about a cold doorknob. I remember turning it very slowly, trying not to make noise, though I'm not sure why I was being quiet. Maybe I didn't want to startle whoever was in there, even though nobody was in there. The mechanism inside the knob was well-oiled, smooth, and silent. It turned easily, almost too easily, like the door wanted to be opened. But I didn't actually open it. I just stood there with my hand on the knob, listening to the nothing that was happening on the other side. The carpet in there was blue, a deep navy blue that looked almost black in dim light. I could picture it clearly, even though I wasn't looking at it. The way it had been recently vacuumed, with those parallel lines that show the direction of the vacuum cleaner's path. Which is strange because I don't remember vacuuming that room recently. I don't remember vacuuming it at all, actually. But I knew exactly how it looked, the precise pattern of the vacuum lines, the way they ran from the window toward the closet door. Even the small depression near the center where someone had been standing, the way carpet looks when it's been compressed by weight. I definitely didn't push the door open just a crack to look inside. That would have been an invasion of privacy, even though it was my own house and there was nobody in there to invade. I just stood there with my hand on the knob, not turning it, not pushing the door, just holding it. The gap widened maybe an inch, just enough to see a slice of the room beyond. The blue carpet exactly as I had pictured it. The vacuum lines running in perfect parallel rows. The slight depression where someone had been standing or was still standing just outside my narrow field of view. I could see the edge of their shadow on the carpet, a dark shape that shouldn't have been there. But there was no shadow, obviously. Shadows require light sources and objects to cast them, and there was nobody in the room to cast anything. It was probably just a variation in the carpet pile, or maybe a stain I had forgotten about. Old carpets develop all kinds of marks and discolorations over time. I closed the door immediately, or rather I let it close itself. It swung shut with a soft click, the latch engaging smoothly. The sound seemed louder than it should have been, like it was echoing in a much larger space than just the hallway where I was standing. But that was probably just my imagination, the way sounds seem amplified when you're nervous about nothing. I wasn't nervous, of course. There was nothing to be nervous about. I was just standing in my own house, looking at my own door, listening to the perfectly normal sounds of an empty room. Houses make noise, floors creak, pipes settle. These are facts, not mysteries. But I kept standing there for a long time afterward, watching that gap under the door, waiting to see if the shadow would move across it, even though there was no shadow and nobody to cast one. The carpet beyond was blue, navy blue, recently vacuumed. I knew this without looking, the same way you know things in dreams, with absolute certainty despite the lack of evidence. I should have just walked away then, gone to another part of the house, maybe made some coffee or turned on the television. Normal activities for a normal evening in a normal house. But I stayed there, watching the thin line of darkness under the door, wondering why it seemed to pulse slightly, like something alive. It wasn't pulsing naturally. Darkness doesn't pulse. It's not a living thing, just the absence of light. What I was seeing was probably just my eyes adjusting to the dim hallway, the way your vision shifts when you stare at something for too long. Perfectly explainable. The metallic smell started around then, though I'm sure it was just the heating system kicking in. Forced air systems sometimes carry odors from the ductwork, especially in older houses where the metal has oxidized over the years. It wasn't unpleasant, exactly, just unusual. Sharp and clean, like the air after lightning strikes. I breathed it in without meaning to, and it seemed to fill my lungs more completely than regular air, thicker somehow, more substantial. But that was probably just because I was paying attention to my breathing, the way you do when you're trying to stay calm. When you focus on breathing, every breath feels different, more significant. My hands were shaking slightly, though that was probably just low blood sugar. I hadn't eaten in a while, and blood sugar fluctuations can cause tremors. Perfectly normal physiological response. Nothing to do with the door or the room beyond or the sounds I wasn't really hearing. I pressed my ear against the door just for a second, just to confirm that there was nothing to hear. The wood was warm against my skin, warmer than it should have been. But wood is a good insulator, so it holds heat from the day. That would explain the temperature. Through the door I could hear them breathing, slow, measured breaths like someone trying very hard to be quiet, but there was nobody there to breathe, so it must have been something else. Air moving through the vents, maybe, or the sound of my own pulse in my ear pressed against the wood. I stepped back quickly, though I'm not sure why. There was nothing to step back from. Just a door, just an empty room, just the normal sounds of a house at rest. I was probably just tired, and tired people do strange things. They imagine sounds and shadows and sensations that aren't really there. But I could still hear the breathing, even with my ear away from the door. Steady and patient, like someone waiting for me to make the next move, which was impossible because there was nobody there to wait, nobody to breathe, nobody to make any kind of move at all. I walked away then, or tried to, but my feet seemed reluctant to leave, like they knew something my brain didn't want to acknowledge. I had to force myself to take each step, to turn my back on the door and walk down the hallway toward the living room. Behind me I heard the doorknob turn with that same smooth, well-oiled sound, the soft click of the latch disengaging, but I didn't turn around to look because there was nothing to see. Doors don't open by themselves, not unless there's a draft or the house is settling in just the right way to affect the mechanism. The footsteps on the blue carpet were barely audible, soft and careful. Someone walking in sock feet, trying not to make noise, but there was nobody there to walk, so it must have been something else. Pipes in the walls, maybe, or the house's wooden frame adjusting to temperature changes. I kept walking toward the living room, not looking back, not acknowledging the sounds that weren't really there. The hallway seemed longer than usual, like it was stretching as I walked, but that was probably just perspective. When you're nervous about nothing, distances can seem distorted. Now I'm sitting here in my perfectly normal living room, telling myself this perfectly normal story about perfectly normal events. Nothing happened. There was nothing in that room, nothing unusual about the door, nothing strange about the silence or the sounds or the way the air felt thick and metallic. I'm not going back to check on that room tonight. There's no need to check on an empty room, no reason to open a door just to confirm what I already know. The carpet is blue, navy blue, recently vacuumed. The room is empty. It's been empty for weeks. But I can hear them moving around in their right now, very quietly, like they're settling in for the night. And I know that when I wake up tomorrow, there will be new vacuum lines on that blue carpet, running in a different direction. Because that's what happens in empty rooms, isn't it? They take care of themselves. Story 5. The air pressed gently against my skin, though I felt no breeze. A low, rhythmic hum filled the space, vibrating through my bones in a way that wasn't entirely sound. The surfaces around me lacked definition. They seemed to breathe with a pulse of their own, swelling in sync with my inhalations. My fingers tingled with an unpleasant numbness, as if the air itself resisted touch. Every shadowless corner suggested an unseen presence, a watcher just out of sight, waiting for something to change. The space held its breath, and so did I, uncertain of what would happen when it finally exhaled. I know I can't go back. The realization sits in my chest like a stone, heavy and immovable. Whatever door I walked through to get here has sealed itself behind me, not with locks or barriers, but with something far more permanent. The very geometry of this place refuses to acknowledge the path I took to arrive. When I try to remember the way in, my mind slides away from the memory like water off glass. But I can still trace the steps backward, can still follow the thread of moments that led me to this breathing room. Each memory unfolds in reverse, revealing details I missed the first time, showing me how blind I was to what was really happening. The humming grows softer when I stop trying to locate its source. It wants to be background noise, wants to fade into the ambient texture of this place. But I remember now when it first became noticeable, when it stopped being something I could ignore. It was in the corridor just before I found this room. The walls there had been normal walls, painted an institutional shade of beige that reminded me of waiting rooms in government buildings. The fluorescent lights flickered with that familiar electrical stutter, casting everything in harsh, intermittent shadows. My footsteps echoed against the linoleum floor, each step announcing my presence to whatever might be listening. But the humming had been there too, threading through the ordinary sounds like a second melody played beneath the first. I had paused, pressing my ear against the cool surface of the wall, trying to determine if the sound came from behind it. The vibration traveled through the plaster and into my skull, a sensation that felt almost like recognition, as if my bones remembered this frequency from somewhere else. The corridor stretched in both directions, longer than seemed reasonable for the building I thought I was in. Doors lined the walls at regular intervals, each one identical to the next, each one slightly ajar. The gaps between door and frame were perfectly uniform, as if someone had measured them with obsessive precision. Through those gaps I could see nothing but darkness, but the darkness seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. I had chosen to move forward rather than back, following the humming toward its apparent source. Each door I passed whispered as I walked by, not with voices, but with the soft rush of air moving through those measured spaces. The sound reminded me of breathing, of lungs expanding and contracting in perfect rhythm. The fluorescent lights began to flicker more erratically the further I walked. Some went out entirely, leaving pools of shadow that seemed deeper than they should have been. In those dark spaces, the humming grew stronger, more insistent. It pulled at something inside my chest, a resonance that made my ribcage feel hollow. That was when I first noticed the walls beginning to lose their sharp edges, their definite boundaries. The beige paint seemed to soften and blur, as if I were looking at it through water. The geometric precision of the corridor started to waver, corners rounding themselves without reason, straight lines developing subtle curves that my eyes couldn't quite track. But even then I hadn't understood what was happening. I thought it was fatigue, or perhaps a problem with my vision. I rubbed my eyes and shook my head, trying to clear whatever was causing the distortion. The humming responded to my movements, shifting pitch slightly, modulating itself to match some internal rhythm I wasn't aware I possessed. Going further back, I can see myself in the stairwell that led to that corridor. The stairs were concrete, utilitarian, painted with that same institutional beige. My hand gripped the metal railing as I climbed, the surface cold and slightly damp beneath my palm. The stairwell was narrow, barely wide enough for two people to pass, and it smelled of cleaning chemicals and something else, something organic and faintly sweet. Each landing had a small window, the glass reinforced with wire mesh. Through those windows I could see what looked like a courtyard, though the view never seemed quite right. The proportions were off in ways I couldn't articulate, distances that appeared close when I looked straight ahead but stretched impossibly far when glimpsed from the corner of my eye. The humming had been present even then, though so faint I mistook it for the building's ventilation system. It wove itself into the background noise so seamlessly that I only noticed it when it briefly stopped, leaving a silence that felt like held breath. In those moments of quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat echoing off the concrete walls, amplified and distorted until it sounded like someone else's pulse entirely. I had been climbing towards something specific, though the memory of what grows hazier the further back I trace it. There had been an appointment, a meeting, something I needed to attend to. The details slip away when I try to focus on them, leaving only the impression of obligation, of necessity. The door to the stairwell had been heavy, requiring effort to open. It swung shut behind me with a solid thud that reverberated through the narrow space. I remember pausing after that sound, struck by how final it seemed, how much it resembled the closing of something that wasn't meant to be reopened. Before the stairwell, I was in a lobby that looked perfectly normal. Tile floors polished to a high shine, potted plants arranged in corners, a reception desk staffed by someone whose face I can no longer recall. The space buzzed with the ordinary activity of people going about their business, conversations blending into a comfortable murmur of human voices. But even there, in that mundane setting, something had been wrong. The potted plants were all the same species, their leaves identical in size and shape, as if they had been manufactured rather than grown. The people moving through the lobby followed paths that seemed choreographed, their movements too smooth, too purposeful. They avoided looking directly at each other, their gazes sliding away whenever eye contact threatened to occur. The receptionist had given me directions to the stairwell, pointing toward a hallway I hadn't noticed before. Their voice carried that same rhythmic quality as the humming, a cadence that felt hypnotic and slightly off-putting. I found myself nodding along to their words before I fully processed their meaning, my body responding to the rhythm before my mind could catch up. The building's entrance had seemed straightforward enough from the outside. Glass doors, a simple facade, the kind of anonymous architecture that fills cities everywhere. I had walked up to those doors with confidence, certain of my purpose, clear about what I needed to do. But as I pushed through the entrance, I felt a subtle shift in the air pressure, a change so slight it barely registered as sensation. The transition from outside to inside carried with it the faintest trace of that humming, so quiet it might have been imagination, so persistent it seemed to have always been there. The glass doors closed behind me with a soft hiss, and I noticed how the sound seemed to echo longer than it should have, bouncing off surfaces that didn't quite match the visual layout of the lobby. The echo carried undertones that reminded me of whispers, of conversations held just below the threshold of hearing. Going back further still, I can see myself standing on the sidewalk outside, looking up at the building's facade. The structure rose above me, its windows reflecting the sky in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, almost like a code. Other pedestrians flowed around me, their footsteps creating a percussion against the concrete that almost, but not quite, matched that internal rhythm I was beginning to recognize. I had received instructions to come here, though the source of those instructions grows murkier with each backward step. A phone call, perhaps, or a letter, something official, something that carried the weight of authority and expectation. The details refused to solidify, remaining always just out of reach, like trying to remember a dream after waking. The neighborhood around the building was unremarkable, the kind of area that exists in the spaces between more notable districts. Streets lined with similar buildings, all sharing that same anonymous quality, all seeming to serve purposes that were never quite explained. People moved through these streets with the focused determination of those who knew exactly where they were going, though none of them seemed to notice the others, as if each person existed in their own separate layer of reality. I had walked several blocks to reach the building, following a route that seemed familiar despite being my first time in this area. Each turn felt predetermined, each street corner a waypoint on a path I had somehow already traveled. The sensation was unsettling in its certainty, as if my feet knew the way even when my mind did not. The sounds of the city formed a complex tapestry around me as I walked, car engines and distant voices and the rustle of wind through leaves. But underneath it all, so faint it might have been the sound of my own circulation, was that rhythmic humming. It seemed to emanate from the pavement itself, vibrating up through the soles of my shoes and into my bones. I had left my apartment that morning with a sense of purpose that felt borrowed, as if someone else's determination had been layered over my own uncertainty. The key turned in the lock with its familiar resistance, and I remember pausing in the hallway, struck by how normal everything looked, how unchanged my surroundings appeared despite the strange gravity of what I was about to do. The morning light streaming through my windows had an unusual quality, softer than normal sunlight, more diffuse. It fell across my furniture in patterns that seemed too perfect, too deliberately arranged. Even the dust motes floating in those beams of light moved with a synchronization that suggested choreography rather than random air currents. I had prepared for this departure carefully, though I couldn't remember making the decision to prepare. My movements felt automatic, guided by an instinct I didn't recognize as my own. I gathered items I thought I might need, though I couldn't articulate why I might need them or what I expected to encounter. The phone call that had set everything in motion came while I was sleeping. I remember the jarring transition from dream to wakefulness, the way the ringing seemed to continue even after I lifted the receiver. The voice on the other end spoke with that same rhythmic cadence I would later recognize in the receptionist, in the humming, in the very pulse of the breathing room where I now find myself. The conversation was brief, the instructions simple. Come to this address, enter through the main doors, ask for directions to the upper floor. The voice provided no context, no explanation for why this was necessary, but the words carried a weight that made questioning seem impossible. I found myself agreeing before I fully understood what I was agreeing to. After hanging up, I lay in bed listening to the silence of my apartment, but the silence wasn't complete. Beneath the familiar sounds of settling wood and distant traffic, I could hear something new, something that might have been the echo of that voice, or might have been my own heartbeat amplified by the darkness. But the true beginning, the moment that started everything, was smaller than a phone call, quieter than a voice giving instructions. It was the sound that woke me just before the phone rang, a sound so subtle I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. It was the sound of my apartment door closing, though I lived alone and had locked it before going to bed. Not the slam of a door being shut, but the gentle click of a latch engaging, the whisper of wood settling into its frame. The sound came from inside my dream and followed me into wakefulness, carrying with it the unmistakable certainty that someone had just left my apartment, someone who had been watching me sleep. In the darkness of my bedroom, I lay perfectly still, listening for footsteps in the hallway, for the creak of floorboards, for any sound that might confirm what I had heard. But there was only silence, and beneath that silence, the faintest suggestion of humming, so quiet it might have been the sound of my own blood moving through my veins. I never got up to check the door. Something in that gentle click, in the careful way it had been closed, told me that checking would be pointless. Whatever had been there was gone now, but it had left something behind, some invisible thread that connected me to this moment, to this breathing room where I now wait for the space to exhale. The humming grows softer as I reach the end of my backward journey, fading into the ambient texture of memory. But I know now that it was always there, woven into the fabric of ordinary sounds, waiting for me to follow it home. Story 6. I assured them it was only the rain tapping at the window. Water collecting, pooling against the glass, I said. That's why the panes shivered, nothing more. Yet the air inside was thick, humid, carrying a trace of something sharp. My shoes left prints in a thin film of dust, disrupted where I'd paused too long on the threshold. The shadows in the corner seemed heavier, as if watching. The metallic tang hung in the air, unmistakable, and the carpet felt damp beneath my feet. I didn't speak of the stain by the door or the muffled sound that echoed after I turned away. My skin still felt the chill. I know now there's no undoing what I've done. The weight of it sits in my chest like a stone, cold and permanent. My hands still shake when I think too hard about the sequence of events, how each choice led inevitably to the next. But if I trace it backward, if I let my mind unspool like thread from a broken spool, maybe I can see where it truly began. The room had been silent for what felt like hours before they arrived. I'd been standing there, staring at the wall where the paint had started to bubble and peel. The moisture had worked its way through somehow, creating patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost like writing. My breathing had grown shallow, and I'd pressed my back against the opposite wall, feeling the coolness seep through my shirt. The silence was the worst part, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something waiting just beneath it. Before that silence there had been the sound, not the tapping I would later claim was rain, but something more rhythmic, more purposeful. It came in sets of 3, with long pauses between, tap, 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 then nothing, then again. I'd counted 17 sequences before I stopped counting. My pulse had begun to match the rhythm, and that's when I knew I had to move away from the window. But moving meant turning my back to it, and the thought of that made my stomach clench. The window hadn't always been like that. Earlier, when the light was different, I'd looked through it and seen the yard beyond, ordinary and empty. The glass had been clear then, unmarked by condensation or the strange smears that would appear later. I'd even opened it once, letting in air that smelled of cut grass and distant cooking. Normal smells, safe smells. But when I'd closed it again, my fingers had stuck slightly to the latch, and when I pulled them away, they came back tacky with something I couldn't identify. I remember now the moment I first noticed the change in the room's temperature. I'd been reading or trying to read when my breath began to mist slightly in front of me, not dramatically, just enough to catch my attention. The pages of the book had started to curl at the edges as if the humidity was rising, though I couldn't understand why. When I touched the wall beside my chair, it felt damp, almost sweating. That's when I'd first looked toward the window and seen the condensation beginning to form. But before the temperature dropped, there had been the smell, faint at first, like copper pennies left in a pocket too long. It mixed with something else, something organic and sweet that made my throat tighten. I'd walked through the room trying to locate the source, checking corners and crevices, but it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It was strongest near the window, though, where the carpet showed those first signs of dampness that I'd later try to explain away. The dampness had appeared gradually. I'd first felt it through my socks when I'd walked to close the curtains, just a slight coolness barely noticeable. But when I knelt to touch the carpet with my hand, it came away slightly damp, and the fibers clung to my palm in a way that made me want to wash my hands immediately. The stain was small then, just a darker patch about the size of a dinner plate. It would grow, of course, but at that moment it looked almost innocent. I can trace it back further now to when I first entered the room and everything seemed normal. The afternoon light had been streaming through the window, warm and golden. The carpet had been dry, the air clear and odorless. I'd settled into the chair with my book, comfortable and unsuspecting. But even then, if I'm honest, there had been something, a quality to the light that seemed slightly off, as if it was being filtered through something I couldn't see. The book I'd been reading was one I'd found in the room itself, left on the small table beside the chair. I hadn't questioned its presence at first. Old houses often have forgotten books in forgotten corners, but as I'd flipped through its pages looking for where I might have left off, I'd noticed that some pages stuck together, not with age or humidity, but with something else. Something that left faint, rusty marks when I'd finally worked them apart. The marks on the pages reminded me of something, though I couldn't place what. They formed patterns, almost like fingerprints, but larger and more diffuse. Some pages had only one or two marks, while others were covered with them, making the text underneath nearly illegible. I'd held the book up to the light, trying to see through the stains, and that's when I'd noticed the shadow on the wall behind me didn't quite match the position of my body. The shadow had been subtle, just slightly out of alignment, like a delayed echo of my movements. When I'd raised my arm, it had followed a fraction of a second later. When I turned my head, the shadow's head had continued turning just a bit too far. I'd stood up and moved around the room, and the shadow had followed, always just slightly wrong, always just a beat behind or ahead of where it should have been. I'd tried to ignore the shadow, focusing instead on the book, but the words kept blurring together. The stains seemed to be spreading even as I watched, creeping across the pages like slow water, and the smell was getting stronger, that metallic sweetness that made my sinuses ache. I'd gotten up to open the window for fresh air, and that's when I'd first touched the latch and felt that strange tackiness. But I'm going back too far forward now. Let me trace it back to the true beginning, to the moment I'd first approached the window at all. I'd been drawn to it by a sound, but not the tapping that would come later. This had been different, softer, like something brushing against the glass from the outside. When I'd looked out, I'd seen nothing unusual, just the empty yard and the fence beyond. But on the glass itself, at eye level, there had been a mark. Small and smudged, like a handprint, but wrong somehow. The thumb was too long or the fingers too short. I'd reached up to wipe it away, and that's when my skin had first made contact with whatever was coating the glass. The substance on the glass had felt warm, despite the coolness of the window itself. It had transferred easily to my fingers, and when I tried to wipe it off on my shirt, it had left a faint stain there too. I'd looked at my hand in the afternoon light, and the substance had seemed to shimmer slightly, like oil or like something alive. That's when I'd first noticed the smell, just a hint of it, carried on the air that was beginning to grow thick. Going back further, I remember entering the room for the first time. The door had been slightly ajar, and I'd pushed it open without thinking. The hinges had been silent, well-oiled, but as the door swung wide, I'd felt a slight resistance, as if the air inside was denser than the air in the hallway. The room had looked normal then, inviting even, with its comfortable chair and the book waiting on the table. But there had been something about the quality of the silence that should have warned me. The silence hadn't been empty. It had been full, pregnant with possibility, like the moment before a storm breaks. And underneath it, so faint I'd almost missed it, there had been a sound like breathing that wasn't quite breathing, like something large and patient, waiting just beyond the edge of perception. I'd attributed it to the house settling, to pipes or ventilation, anything but what I now know it was. But even before I'd opened the door, I'd known something was different. I'd been walking down the hallway, my footsteps echoing normally on the hardwood, when I'd passed that particular door and felt a change in the air pressure. Just a subtle shift, like what you feel in an elevator, but lasting longer. I'd stopped and put my ear to the door, listening. The sound of not quite breathing had been clearer then, and underneath it something else, something like a whisper, but in no language I could recognize. The whisper had been what made me turn the handle, not curiosity exactly, but compulsion. The sound had seemed to be calling, not to me specifically, but to anyone who might be listening. It had been patient and persistent, and it had made my teeth ache in a way I'd never experienced before. My hand had found the door handle without my conscious decision, and the metal had been warm to the touch, warmer than it should have been in the cool hallway. And now, tracing it back to the very beginning, I remember the moment I'd first heard that whisper. I'd been standing in the front hall of the house, having just entered, when it had drifted down from upstairs. So faint it might have been the wind, or the house settling, or pipes in the walls. But it had carried my name, or something close to my name, spoken in a voice that sounded almost like my own, but not quite. That's what had drawn me up the stairs in the first place, following the sound through the hallway to the door that had been waiting, slightly ajar, for someone to push it open and step inside. The whisper had been coming from the room all along, seeping out through the crack in the door like water through stone. And I had followed it, drawn by the sound of my own voice calling to me from somewhere I'd never been, speaking words I'd never said, in a tone that promised answers to questions I hadn't known I was asking. That's where it started, with my own voice calling to me from an empty room, patient and persistent and wrong in ways I couldn't yet understand. Everything that followed was just the consequence of that first moment when I decided to listen, to follow, to open the door and step inside. The voice is still calling now, even as I stand here in the aftermath, trying to explain to them about the rain and the condensation and the perfectly normal reasons for everything they're seeing. But I know better now. I know that some doors once opened can never be closed again, and some voices once answered never stop calling. The stain by the door continues to spread, and my shoes still leave prints in the dust, and the shadows still watch from the corners, but at least now I understand. At least now I know where it all began. With me calling to myself from a room I'd never entered, in a voice that was mine but wasn't, speaking words that meant everything and nothing at all. Story 7. The tap dripped, but the water sounded distant, like each drop was being swallowed by the walls. My hand brushed against the counter, cold and static, yet the surface felt warmer a second before touch. The pattern on the rug shifted underfoot an inch to the right, or was it the left? I pressed my thumb into the groove of the doorknob, feeling a rhythm that wasn't mine. As I stepped back, the room seemed to exhale, furniture slightly askew. It was a subtle dance of elements out of step, and when I turned around, I found the door ajar, but I hadn't touched it. Nothing happened that night. I need to make that clear from the beginning. Whatever I thought I experienced was just my mind playing tricks on me. I'd been working too much, sleeping too little. These things happen when you're exhausted. The brain fills in gaps that aren't really there. I wasn't even supposed to be in that house. It was a mistake, really. I'd taken the wrong turn coming back from the grocery store, ended up on a street I didn't recognize. The GPS kept saying recalculating in that mechanical voice over and over, but I didn't see anything unusual. Just a regular suburban street with regular houses and regular driveways. The house I stopped at was perfectly normal. White siding, black shutters, a mailbox that said nothing at all. I only pulled into the driveway because I needed to turn around. That's the only reason. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, engine running, just getting my bearings. The porch light was on, casting this warm yellow glow across the front steps, completely ordinary. I didn't get out of the car. Why would I? It wasn't my house. I had no reason to walk up to the front door, no reason to notice how the wood grain seemed to spiral in patterns that hurt to follow. The door was painted blue, a deep navy blue that reminded me of water at night, but I'm only guessing about the color. I was too far away to see clearly. When I put the car in reverse, that's when I thought I heard something, but it was probably just the engine cooling down, that ticking sound metal makes when it contracts. It definitely wasn't voices. There were no voices coming from inside the house, muffled and overlapping like people talking in another room. I would have remembered voices. I backed out of the driveway and drove home. End of story, nothing else happened. Except I keep thinking about the windows, not that I was looking at them or anything. I was focused on backing out safely. But sometimes when you're not really paying attention, your peripheral vision picks up details. The windows were dark, which makes sense because it was late, but the darkness seemed too complete, too uniform, like someone had painted the glass black from the inside. That's impossible, of course. Who would paint their windows black? It was probably just heavy curtains or blinds, or maybe the angle of my headlights created an optical illusion. There are dozens of reasonable explanations. I definitely didn't see movement behind those windows, a shape passing from one room to another, tall and thin and moving too smoothly. That was just my imagination filling in details that weren't there. The mind does that sometimes, especially when you're tired. It creates patterns and movement where none exist. The drive home was completely normal. I took the main road, stopped at every red light, used my turn signals properly. I listened to the radio, some late-night talk show about gardening tips. The host had a soothing voice, very calm and measured. He was talking about soil pH and drainage, things I don't really understand but found oddly comforting. I didn't think about the house at all during the drive. Why would I? It was just a random house where I'd turned around. I certainly didn't find myself taking mental notes about the layout, trying to picture what the inside might look like. I wasn't imagining hardwood floors and cream-colored walls, wasn't wondering about the placement of furniture or the view from the upstairs windows. When I got home, I went straight to bed. I fell asleep immediately and slept through the night without any dreams. I definitely didn't have that recurring dream where I'm walking through rooms I've never seen before, rooms with high ceilings and crown molding and a particular smell like vanilla and dust. Dreams like that are just your subconscious processing random information from the day. The next morning I felt completely refreshed. I had my usual breakfast, checked my email, went about my normal routine. I didn't think about the house once. There was no reason to drive by that street again, no compulsion to see if everything looked the same in daylight. I had better things to do with my time. But later that week, I found myself in the same neighborhood, purely by coincidence. I was meeting a friend for lunch at a restaurant nearby, and I got there early, so I decided to drive around and explore the area. It's a nice neighborhood, well maintained, the kind of place where people take pride in their lawns and keep their driveways swept clean. I didn't intentionally look for the house. I was just driving, taking random turns, not really paying attention to where I was going. But somehow I ended up on that same street again. The house looked different in daylight, smaller somehow, less imposing. The blue door was actually more of a teal color, I realized, though I still maintain I hadn't gotten close enough to see it clearly that first night. This time I didn't pull into the driveway. I just slowed down as I passed, maybe curious about the neighborhood property values or the architectural style. It's a colonial, I think, though I'm not good with house styles. 2 stories, dormer windows, a chimney that needs repointing. Completely unremarkable. The mailbox did have a name on it, I noticed, though I couldn't read it from the street. The letters were too small and faded, not that it mattered. I wasn't trying to find out who lived there. I was just observing details the way anyone might when driving through a new area. There was a car in the driveway this time, a dark sedan, maybe 10 years old, with a small dent in the rear bumper. The kind of car you see everywhere, the kind that blends into traffic. I wondered briefly who it belonged to, but only in that idle way you wonder about strangers' lives when you're stuck in traffic or waiting in line somewhere. I drove past and didn't think about it again. At least I tried not to think about it. But sometimes when I was falling asleep, I'd find my mind wandering back to that street, that house, those painted black windows. Not because anything significant had happened there, but because the human brain has a tendency to fixate on random details for no particular reason. I started having trouble sleeping, probably unrelated to anything specific, just general stress from work and life. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me. Old houses make noise, especially at night when the temperature drops and the wood contracts, creaking and sighing and occasional sharp cracks that sound almost like footsteps. During one of those sleepless nights, I found myself thinking about the layout of that house again. Not because I'd been inside or anything, but because from the outside you can make educated guesses about floor plans. The front door probably opens into a foyer with stairs going up to the second floor. There might be a living room to the right, a dining room to the left, kitchen in the back. Standard colonial layout. I imagine the walls were painted in neutral colors, beige or off-white. The kind of safe choices people make when they're not sure about their decorating skills. Hardwood floors throughout the main level, maybe with area rugs to add warmth. A brick fireplace in the living room, probably not used very often because they're inefficient and messy. These weren't memories, obviously, just idle speculation based on having seen hundreds of similar houses over the years. I've been in enough colonial-style homes to know how they're typically arranged. There was nothing supernatural or mysterious about being able to picture the interior. It was just logical deduction. The kitchen would be at the back of the house, overlooking the backyard. White cabinets, granite countertops, stainless steel appliances. A breakfast nook with windows on two sides, letting in morning light. The kind of kitchen you see in home improvement magazines, functional but not particularly inspired. Upstairs there would be 3 or 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. The master bedroom at the front of the house with those dormer windows I'd noticed. The other bedrooms smaller, maybe one converted into a home office or guest room. Hardwood floors up there too, probably, with throw rugs beside the beds. I wasn't obsessing over these details. I was just passing time during those long, sleepless hours. The mind needs something to focus on, and imagining house layouts is harmless enough. Better than lying there worrying about work deadlines or relationship problems or all the other things that keep people awake at night. But I kept coming back to those windows, in my imagination, I mean. The way they'd look so completely dark, as if the rooms behind them were deeper than they should be. I told myself it was just the angle of the light, or maybe they had those blackout curtains that photographers use. There are plenty of reasonable explanations for why windows might appear completely dark. I didn't drive by the house again for several weeks. I had no reason to. I'd found other routes to the places I needed to go, more direct paths that didn't take me through that particular neighborhood. It wasn't avoidance exactly, just efficiency. Why take the long way when there are faster alternatives? But one afternoon I found myself on that street again. I'd been running errands, going to the bank and the pharmacy, and somehow I'd gotten turned around. The GPS on my phone had stopped working, probably because I'd forgotten to update the app. So I was navigating by memory, trying to find my way back to familiar roads. The house looked the same as before. Maybe the grass was a little longer and there were leaves scattered across the driveway that no one had bothered to rake. The dark sedan was gone, replaced by a small SUV with out-of-state plates. New residents, probably. People move all the time, especially in rental properties. I slowed down without really meaning to, just curious about the changes. The front door was still that teal blue color, but it looked like someone had hung a wreath on it. Seasonal decoration, the kind of thing people do to make their homes feel more welcoming. Though from where I sat in the car, I couldn't quite make out what kind of wreath it was. The windows still bothered me. Even in full daylight, they seemed darker than they should be. Not painted black, I realized now, but reflecting something that wasn't there. Like mirrors showing an image of somewhere else, somewhere with no light at all. That's ridiculous, of course. Windows don't work that way. They reflect what's in front of them: sky, clouds, trees, passing cars. The darkness I thought I was seeing was probably just the shadow of the roof overhang, or maybe the windows needed cleaning. Dirty glass can create all sorts of optical illusions. I drove away and promised myself I wouldn't come back. There was nothing special about that house, nothing that warranted this kind of attention. I was being foolish, letting my imagination run away with me over something completely ordinary. I had better things to do with my time than drive around staring at strangers' houses. But that night I had the dream again, the one where I'm walking through those rooms I've never seen before. This time I noticed more details. The crown molding had a subtle egg-and dart pattern, painted the same cream color as the walls. The hardwood floors were oak, with a satin finish that reflected just enough light to show the grain. There was a grandfather clock in the hallway, though I couldn't hear it ticking. In the dream, I knew exactly where I was going. Up the stairs, past the family photos I couldn't quite see clearly, down the hall to the room at the end. The door was always closed, but I knew what was behind it. A bedroom with windows facing the street, windows that looked black from the outside but were perfectly clear from within. I'd stand at those windows in the dream, looking down at the street, watching cars pass by, waiting for something, though I never knew what. The room behind me felt larger than it should have, as if the walls had moved back while I wasn't paying attention. When I turned around, the door was always gone. These were just anxiety dreams, the kind everyone has when they're stressed. The brain processes information differently during sleep, creating narratives that don't make logical sense. There was nothing prophetic or meaningful about dreaming of rooms I'd never seen. It was just neurons firing randomly, creating false memories and impossible architectures. I stopped driving through that neighborhood altogether. I found new routes to everywhere I needed to go, even if they took longer. I deleted the area from my mental map, treated it like a construction zone to be avoided. Out of sight, out of mind, as they say. The dreams stopped after a while, or maybe I just stopped remembering them. Either way, I was sleeping better, waking up more refreshed. I convinced myself that whatever strange fixation I developed was over, that I'd moved on from that brief period of irrational behavior. But sometimes when I'm driving at night and the radio is playing softly and the road ahead is empty, I find myself thinking about that house again. Not obsessively, just the way you might remember a song you heard once and can't quite get out of your head. I wonder who lives there now, whether they've repainted the door or replaced those dark windows. I wonder if they sleep well at night, or if they lie awake listening to sounds that might just be the house settling. I wonder if they ever stand at the upstairs windows, looking down at the street, waiting for something they can't name. But these are just idle thoughts, the kind that drift through your mind when you're not really concentrating on anything important. They don't mean anything. They're certainly not memories of something that actually happened. I never went inside that house. I never walked up those front steps or turned that brass doorknob or stepped into that cream-colored foyer. I never climbed those stairs or stood in that bedroom or looked out through windows that seemed to show a different world than the one I knew. None of that happened. It was all just imagination, just dreams, just the mind's tendency to create stories where none exist. I'm sure of that. I have to be sure of that. Though sometimes when I'm drifting off to sleep, I can still smell that particular combination of vanilla and dust, still feel the texture of that oak flooring under my feet. And sometimes I wake up with the strangest certainty that somewhere in a house I've never entered, there's a door with my name on it, waiting to be opened again. But that's impossible, of course, completely impossible. Nothing like that could ever happen to someone like me. I live in the real world, where houses are just houses and windows are just windows and dreams are just the brain's way of filing away the day's experiences. Everything is perfectly normal, everything is exactly as it should be. And if sometimes I catch myself driving a little slower past certain streets, well, that's just coincidence. Just the random patterns that emerge when you live in the same area for long enough. There's nothing to worry about, nothing at all. Though I did notice just this morning that my GPS has been acting up again, recalculating routes, suggesting turns I don't remember programming. And there's a new street showing up on the map, one I don't recognize, with a small blue dot marking what looks like a destination I never set. But that's probably just a software glitch. These things happen all the time with technology. There's no reason to think it means anything more than that. No reason at all, Story 8. I'm trying to remember what happened. The doctors say that's normal, that sometimes the mind protects itself by hiding things away in dark corners where we can't reach them. But pieces keep surfacing, like debris washing up on a shore I didn't know existed. That tug on my shirt, it comes back to me in fragments, disconnected from everything else. I was walking somewhere. A corridor with walls the color of old paper, yellowed and water-stained. The floor beneath my feet made no sound, but I could feel it vibrating, as if something heavy was moving far below. I remember the smell of metal, not rust, but something cleaner, sharper, like coins held too long in a sweaty palm. It clung to the inside of my nostrils and wouldn't leave, even when I tried breathing through my mouth. Sometimes I wake up and that smell is still there, faint but persistent, like a stain that won't wash out. There was a hum, always a hum. It lived inside the walls, inside my skull, pulsing with a rhythm that almost matched my heartbeat, but not quite. The discord made my teeth ache. I'd press my palms against my ears, but the sound came from within, vibrating through bone and tissue until I couldn't tell where it ended and I began. The corridor stretched longer than it should have. I counted my steps once, or maybe I dreamed I did. 47 steps to reach the door at the end, but when I turned around, the entrance I'd come through was only 20 steps behind me. Mathematics broken, space folded wrong. I told myself it was the stress, the sleepless nights, the way exhaustion can warp perception. But that tug, that gentle, insistent tug. I remember a room with no windows. The walls curved slightly, creating the impression of being inside something organic, something that might expand and contract with breath. The light came from panels set flush with the ceiling, casting no shadows. Everything looked flat, two-dimensional, like a photograph of a place rather than the place itself. There was a chair in the center. Red vinyl cracked along the arms where countless hands had gripped too tightly. I knew without touching it that the material would be warm, body temperature warm, as if someone had just stood up and walked away. I never sat in that chair. I don't think I ever sat in that chair. The air tasted thick, copper and ozone, like the moment before lightning strikes. My skin felt tight, stretched over bones that seemed too large for my body. When I moved, I could hear fabric rustling, but it sounded wrong, muffled, as if I were hearing it through water. Someone was watching. I knew this the way you know when you're dreaming, with absolute certainty that defies explanation. Not from the corners of the room where shadows might hide an observer, but from above, from below, from within the walls themselves. Eyes without faces, attention without source. The weight of being seen pressed down on my shoulders until I had to fight to keep standing straight. I tried to leave. This part comes back clearly, the panic rising in my throat like bile. I turned toward where the door should have been, but the wall was seamless, unbroken. My hands found no handle, no seam, no way out. The surface felt warm under my palms, and for a moment I thought I felt it pulse, a slow heartbeat thrumming through whatever material it was made from. The tug came again, gentle, persistent, but this time it wasn't on my shirt. It was inside me, something pulling at my ribs, at the space behind my sternum, drawing me toward the center of the room, toward the chair. My feet moved without my permission, sliding across the smooth floor as if I were walking on ice. I fought against it, leaning backward, but the pull was inexorable. I remember the sound of my breathing, harsh and rapid in the too quiet space. The hum grew louder, matching the rhythm of my pulse, synchronizing until I couldn't tell which was which. My vision started to blur at the edges, darkness creeping in like spilled ink. Then nothing. I wake up sometimes with the taste of metal in my mouth and marks on my arms that look like fingerprints, purple-black impressions that fade by evening. I tell myself they're from sleeping wrong, from pressing against the bed frame or clutching the sheets too tightly, but they're always in the same places, always the same size. The corridor visits me in dreams. Sometimes it's longer, sometimes shorter. Sometimes there are doors along the walls, dozens of them, all identical and all locked. Sometimes there are no doors at all, just endless stretches of that yellowed wallpaper with patterns that shift when I'm not looking directly at them. I've tried to map it out, to draw what I remember, but the pencil lines never match what I see in my mind. The proportions are wrong, the angles impossible. I'll start drawing a straight line and find that it curves without my intending it to, spiraling inward like water circling a drain. The smell of metal follows me, not always, but often enough that I've stopped wearing jewelry, stopped carrying coins. I thought maybe it was something I was bringing into the space with me, some contamination from the outside world, but it persists, that sharp, clean scent that makes my stomach turn. There were others, I think there were others, voices that might have been real or might have been echoes of my own thoughts bouncing off those curved walls. Whispers in languages I didn't recognize, or maybe just the sound of air moving through spaces it shouldn't fit. Sometimes I catch myself listening for them, straining to hear words in the white noise of air conditioning or traffic. The chair haunts me most of all. In my dreams I sit in it willingly, eagerly even. The vinyl is warm against my skin, conforming to my body like it was made for me specifically. In those dreams, the pulling sensation stops. Everything becomes still, quiet, peaceful. I understand then why I was brought there, why the tug was necessary. But I always wake before I remember what that understanding was. I've started noticing things, small things, the way shadows fall differently in certain rooms, the way some surfaces feel warm when they should be cold, cold when they should be warm, the way my reflection sometimes takes a half second too long to follow my movements in mirrors. And the tugging has started again. Not on my clothes this time, deeper, like something has hooked itself behind my ribs and is slowly, gently drawing me back. I find myself walking down corridors without remembering how I got there, looking for doors that might lead to rooms with no windows and red vinyl chairs. I think I'm supposed to remember. I think the forgetting was temporary, a brief reprieve before something larger begins. The fragments are coming together, forming a picture I'm not sure I want to see completed, but the pull is getting stronger. The metal smell is getting stronger too. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between sleep and waking, I can hear that hum again, patient and persistent, calling me home to a place I never wanted to visit. The tug on my shirt was just the beginning, the gentlest invitation to something that was always going to claim me eventually. I think it's time to stop fighting it. I think it's time to remember what I was trying so hard to forget. The corridor is waiting, and the chair is still warm, and something is pulling me back with fingers made of memory and need. The tugging has become constant now. I can feel it even as I write this, that gentle insistence that I have somewhere else to be. The smell of metal fills the room, and I can hear the hum starting up again, soft but growing stronger. I should put this away now. I should stop trying to piece together what was never meant to be broken apart. Some memories are fragments for a reason, and some doors are meant to stay closed. But the pulling is so gentle, so patient, like a child tugging at my shirt, asking me to come and see what they've found in the dark. I think I'm going to follow it this time. I think I'm ready to remember what's waiting for me at the end of that impossible corridor, in that room with no windows, in that chair that knows the shape of my body better than I do. The hum is getting louder now, the tug is getting stronger. And I can almost see the door beginning to open. Story 9. I assured them it was nothing more than a momentary slip, a slight stumble on the path. The path, though, was dry and firm, not a whisper of dew to witness my fall. The scent of pine was sharp, mingling with something metallic that lingered heavy in the air. Leaves lay undisturbed beneath my steps, yet the soil bore impressions that shouldn't have been. The breeze was too still against my skin, clinging almost conspiratorially. I didn't see the need to mention the broken branch or the quiet that followed. But the dirt under my nails told another story. The humming started 3 weeks later, or maybe it had always been there, threading through my sleep like a needle pulling invisible thread. I wake with the taste of copper coating my tongue, my sheets damp with sweat that smells wrong, too clean, too sharp. The bedroom walls seem to pulse in rhythm with something I can't name, breathing in the spaces between my heartbeats. There's a door in my kitchen that stands slightly ajar. I don't remember opening it. The gap is precisely 2 inches wide, measured by the sliver of darkness that spills through. When I approach, my fingertips tingle with static electricity that shouldn't exist in the dry air. The handle is warm to the touch, as if someone's hand had just released it moments before mine arrived. The noise didn't come from outside. My reflection in the bathroom mirror flickers sometimes. Not the lights, those remain steady, casting their harsh white glow across the porcelain and chrome. But my face wavers like heat rising from summer asphalt, distorting at the edges where my peripheral vision blurs into something else. Something that watches back with eyes that aren't quite the right shade of familiar. I find myself standing in the backyard at hours I don't recall choosing. The grass beneath my bare feet is wet, though no rain has fallen for days. Each blade seems to bend away from my weight, creating perfect circles of avoidance around my ankles. The air tastes of ozone and distant lightning, charged with possibility that makes my skin crawl with anticipation I don't understand. There were lights behind the trees. The broken branch haunts my peripheral vision now, appearing in places where no branch should be. Suspended in the corner of my living room, hovering just beyond the reach of the ceiling fan's lazy rotation. Pressed against the shower door while steam fogs the glass around its impossible presence. Always the same angle of fracture, the same raw wood exposed like bone through bark. Sleep comes in fragments now, interrupted by sensations that don't belong to dreams. My body lifts slightly from the mattress, held aloft by currents of air that move with purpose rather than chance. The ceiling above my bed develops patterns in the darkness, geometric shapes that shift and realign when I'm not looking directly at them. My skin tingles with the memory of touch that never quite makes contact. The humming grows stronger near the kitchen door. That gap of 2 inches has become a portal for sound that originates somewhere beyond the frame, somewhere deeper than the pantry or the wall or the foundation beneath. When I press my ear to the opening, the vibration travels through my skull like a tuning fork struck against bone. I don't remember ever coming back. The metallic scent returns in waves, strongest during the transition between day and night. It clings to my clothing and seeps into my hair, following me through rooms that seem larger than they were before. Distances stretch when I'm not paying attention, the hallway extending like taffy pulled between invisible hands, the space between furniture expanding to accommodate something unseen. My hands shake when I try to write about the path. The pen skips across paper as if the ink refuses to form certain words, certain shapes that might give form to memories that resist documentation. The soil under my fingernails has never fully washed away, despite scrubbing until my skin turns raw. It's become part of me now, this evidence of something I can't quite recall. The door breathes. Not metaphorically, I can see the gap widen and narrow by fractions of inches, as if the house itself is drawing breath through this opening I never created. The warm handle pulses with a rhythm that matches my heartbeat, or perhaps my heartbeat has adjusted to match its tempo. When I place my palm against the wood, vibrations travel up my arm like electricity seeking ground. Time moves differently in the spaces between waking and sleeping. Minutes stretch into hours while I lie motionless, feeling the weight of attention pressing down from above. The ceiling patterns have become more complex, forming networks of connection that seem to map territories I've never visited but somehow recognize. My skin remembers sensations that my mind refuses to acknowledge. The lights behind the trees pulse in sequence now. 1, 2, 3, pause, 1, 2, 3, pause. I count along without conscious decision, my body swaying slightly to their rhythm while I stand at windows I don't remember approaching. The glass is always warm against my forehead, heated by sources that aren't the sun. There's dirt in places dirt shouldn't be, between the pages of books I haven't opened, ground into the fibers of clothes I haven't worn outside, scattered across the bathroom counter like evidence of journeys I can't recall taking. Each grain carries the scent of that metallic pine, sharp and clean and utterly wrong. The broken branch has multiplied. Now there are 3, then 5, then too many to count accurately. They hover in corners and doorways, suspended by forces that don't acknowledge gravity. Each one bears the same precise angle of fracture, the same exposure of pale wood that seems to glow with its own internal light. My reflection has stopped flickering. Now it simply lags, moving a heartbeat behind my actual motions like delayed video transmission. When I raise my hand, my mirror image hesitates before following suit. When I turn away, I catch glimpses of my reflection continuing to stare straight ahead, watching something I can't see. The humming has words now, or what might be words if I could understand the language they're spoken in. Syllables that bypass my ears and resonate directly in the cavity of my chest, setting my ribs vibrating like a struck bell. The kitchen door gap has widened to 3 inches, then 4, revealing darkness that seems thicker than the absence of light. I assured them it was nothing more than a momentary slip. But the path remembers everything I've forgotten. Each night I return to that moment of stumbling, feeling my foot catch on nothing visible, my balance shifting toward emptiness that shouldn't exist. The pine scent grows stronger with each repetition, the metallic tang coating my throat like medicine I never chose to swallow. The soil bears impressions that multiply in my memory, not just my footprints now, but other shapes that don't match human feet, patterns that suggest weight distributed in ways that defy familiar anatomy. The broken branch was just the beginning, the first sign of something that bent the world slightly out of true. The door stands open now, revealing a darkness that has depth and texture. The humming emerges from this space like invitation, like summons, like recognition of something I've always known but never admitted. My skin tingles with the memory of that first stumble, that moment when the path gave way beneath certainty. The dirt under my nails tells the only story that matters, and it's a story that hasn't ended yet. Story 10. The access log displayed an entry at 22:14, yet the room's security camera feed showed uninterrupted static from 21:32 onward. The reinforced door was closed and latched as confirmed by the internal sensor. Examination of the interior revealed intact furniture and undisturbed dust layers on all surfaces. A single cup rested on a neatly folded cloth, its contents undiscernible under the dull overhead light. The air conditioning was operational, maintaining a consistent temperature of 68 degrees Fahrenheit. No footprints disturbed the carpet fibers. The system status report indicated all alarms were deactivated without error. The absence of expected personnel remains unaccounted. To whoever reads this, if anyone ever does. I was the expected personnel. I wrote that report 3 months ago. I don't know why I'm writing this now, or why my hands shake every time I think about that cup, that cloth, the way the light fell across surfaces that shouldn't have been disturbed but somehow felt different, wrong, like the room had been holding its breath. You need to understand something about me first. I've always been the reliable one. 22 years of security work, perfect attendance record, never questioned protocol. I filed reports in triplicate, double-checked every sensor reading, took pride in the mundane precision of my job. I was the guy who noticed when someone moved a chair 2 inches to the left, who could tell you exactly how many steps it took to walk from the main desk to the emergency exit. But that night, I keep trying to remember how I got into that room. The log says I accessed it at 22:14, but I remember standing in the hallway at 21:30, staring at the door, watching the red light of the sensor blink its steady rhythm. The static had already started on the monitors. By then I'd made a note to call maintenance in the morning. Just routine equipment failure, nothing unusual. Except I never made that call. The cup, God, that cup, I dream about it every night now, sitting there on the folded cloth like someone had just finished drinking from it. But the dust was undisturbed. I measured it myself, ran my finger along the desk edges, the windowsill, everywhere. Weeks of accumulation untouched, yet that cup sat there, clean and somehow warm when I finally worked up the courage to touch it. The contents were clear, not water too thick, not quite oil too light. It moved when I tilted the cup, sluggish and strange, catching the overhead light in ways that made my eyes water. I should have taken a sample, should have followed protocol. Instead, I set it back down exactly where I found it and backed away until I hit the wall. That's when I noticed the silence. The air conditioning was running, my report confirms it. The sensors confirm it, but I couldn't hear it anymore. Couldn't hear anything. The building around me, usually full of small sounds, electrical hums, settling noises, had gone completely quiet. Not peaceful quiet, expectant quiet, like the moment before someone speaks, stretched out indefinitely. I tried to call it in, picked up my radio, pressed the button, opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Not because I couldn't speak, I could feel my vocal cords working, feel the air moving through my throat, but because the words just weren't there anymore. Like I'd forgotten not just what to say, but how to say it, how to make meaning out of sound. So I stood there. How long? The timestamp on my report says I was in that room for 42 minutes, but it felt like hours, days. I stood there watching that cup, waiting for something to happen, knowing something already had but unable to name it. The liquid inside moved occasionally, tiny ripples spreading outward from the center, though nothing was disturbing it. The surface tension was all wrong. When I finally left, and I still don't remember deciding to leave, just suddenly finding myself in the hallway again, the door sealed behind me with its usual soft click. The red light resumed its blinking. The static on the monitors cleared up instantly, showing the empty room, the undisturbed dust, the cup exactly where I'd left it. I wrote my report the next morning. Read it over a dozen times, checking every detail against my memory. Everything accurate, everything true, everything impossible. That should have been the end of it. But you have to understand what happened next, the small things first. My reflection in the bathroom mirror that morning looked thin, not thinner thin, like it was somehow less substantial than it should be. I could see through it slightly, make out the tiles on the wall behind my head. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, looked again. Normal, solid, but for just that moment. My wife asked if I was feeling all right when I got home. Said I looked pale, distant, asked if something had happened at work. I opened my mouth to tell her about the room, the cup, the impossible silence, and found myself saying just tired instead. Not because I chose to lie, but because those were the only words that would come out, like my tongue had forgotten how to form the others. She made me tea, Earl Grey, my favorite. I took a sip and nearly choked it. Tasted exactly like whatever had been in that cup, thick and strange and somehow familiar, like something I'd tasted before but couldn't place. I dumped it down the sink when she wasn't looking and told her it was perfect. The dreams started that night. Not dreams really, more like visitations. I'd find myself back in that room, standing in front of the desk, staring at the cup. But in the dreams, the liquid was moving more actively, swirling in patterns that almost made sense, like it was trying to show me something. Sometimes I could hear voices in the movement, whispers just below the threshold of understanding. Sometimes the room was different, bigger or smaller, or filled with furniture that didn't belong there, chairs and tables from my childhood home, my first apartment, places I hadn't thought about in years. In one dream, I picked up the cup and drank from it. The liquid was warm, tasted like copper and ozone and something else, something organic. As soon as I swallowed, I could see the room as it really was, not empty, not undisturbed, but full of presence. Shapes moving in my peripheral vision, always just out of direct sight. The dust wasn't dust at all, but something else, something that had been there much longer than weeks, something that had been waiting. I woke up with the taste still in my mouth. The next few days blur together. I went to work, filed my reports, made my rounds, but people started looking at me strangely. Not concerned looks, confused looks, like they recognized me but couldn't quite place where from. My supervisor asked if I was new, introduced himself like we hadn't worked together for 6 years. The security guard at the front desk checked my ID 3 times before letting me in, kept staring at my photo like it didn't match my face. I checked the employee directory. My name was still there, my photo, my hire date, but the photo looked wrong somehow. Still me, but flatter, like a copy of a copy, missing some essential detail that made it real. The room stayed locked after that night. New protocols, they said, restricted access. I asked why, but nobody seemed to know, or if they knew, they couldn't explain it in words that made sense. Just vague references to irregularities and pending investigation. The cup was gone when I finally managed to get another look inside. The cloth too, just an empty desk and that same undisturbed dust. But I could still feel it sometimes, that presence, that waiting, not just in the room, everywhere, in the spaces between words when people talk to me, in the pause between my footsteps in empty hallways, in the moment between sleeping and waking when the world feels thin enough to step through. I started avoiding mirrors, not because of vanity, but because my reflection was becoming less reliable. Sometimes it moved a fraction of a second too late, like it was copying me rather than being me. Sometimes it was sharper than it should be, more detailed, like it was more real than the person casting it. Once, I swear I saw it blink when my eyes were open. My wife stopped asking if I was all right, started talking to me like I was someone she'd just met, polite but distant. Our conversations became stilted, formal. She'd introduce me to neighbors we'd known for years, started leaving notes around the house with my name on them like reminders. Milk for my name, dry cleaning, my name, shirts. As if she was trying to remember who I was or convince herself I existed. I found one of the notes in her handwriting that just said my name over and over, dozens of times, like she was practicing. The handwriting got shakier toward the bottom, less certain. The worst part is I started to understand why. When I look in the mirror now, really look, I can see what they see. The edges of me are blurring. Not physically, I'm still solid, still here, but somehow I'm becoming less present, less real. Like I'm fading out of the world one interaction at a time, one forgotten conversation at a time. I think it started in that room, with that cup, with whatever I touched or whatever touched me. I think I brought something back with me or left something behind, some essential part of myself that made me recognizable, memorable, real. I've been back to the building. They don't recognize me at the front desk anymore. My keycard doesn't work. According to their records, no one with my name has ever worked there. The security footage from that night has been archived, but when I finally manage to access it, the timestamp jumps from 21:31 to 22:15, 44 minutes of missing time that officially never existed. But I remember the silence, the cup, the taste of something that wasn't quite liquid. I remember the feeling of being watched by something that existed in the spaces between seconds, between thoughts, between the moments when reality blinks. I'm writing this because I can feel myself disappearing, not dying, disappearing, becoming less real each day, less substantial, less memorable. Soon I think I'll fade out entirely. My wife will wake up one morning in a house that feels too big, wondering why she bought a two-person couch for one person. My coworkers will walk past my desk without wondering why it's empty. The world will close up around the space I used to occupy like water filling a hole. Maybe that's what happened to the expected personnel who was supposed to be in that room. Maybe they touched something they shouldn't have, tasted something that tasted them back, and slowly, quietly, stopped existing in any way that mattered. If you're reading this, if this letter somehow survives when I don't, then maybe you're the next expected personnel. Maybe you'll find yourself standing in a room that shouldn't be empty but is, staring at something that shouldn't be there but is, feeling the weight of a silence that's too complete to be natural. If that happens, don't touch anything, don't taste anything, don't try to understand it. Just leave. Run. And don't look back, because something might be following you, something that lives in the spaces between what is and what should be, something that feeds on the difference between existing and being remembered. I can barely see my handwriting now. The pen feels too light in my fingers, like I'm not pressing hard enough to make marks on the paper. But I can see the words appearing, so I must still be here. Still real enough to write, if not real enough to be seen. The taste is back in my mouth, copper and ozone and waiting. I think it's time to go.